The Shadow of the Steppes, an epic chronicle of Attila the Hun. Chapter 1. Whispers on the Wind, Birth of the Scourge, c. 395 to 434 AD. The wind, eternally restless, swept across the endless sea of grass that was the Pontic steppe. It carried the scent of damp earth, wild horses, and distant wood smoke, whispering secrets older than the Roman Empire itself. In a felt-covered yurt, sturdy against the elements but yielding to the gale's song, a child entered a world defined by movement, hardship, and the unyielding rhythm of the horse. He was named Attila. The year was likely around 395 AD, a time when the Western Roman Empire creaked under its own weight. The Eastern Empire glittered precariously in Constantinople, and the nomadic tribes beyond the Danube were stirring with a new, terrifying cohesion. Attila knew no stone walls, only the vast dome of the sky. His cradle was the saddled bow, his lullaby, the thunder of hooves and the guttural chants of his people. The Huns were not one tribe, but a confederation forged in the crucible of the steppe, masters of the horse and the composite bow. They lived by raiding, tribute, and an intimate, brutal understanding of survival. Attila's lineage, the royal house descended from legendary figures like Balamber, placed him near the apex of this fluid hierarchy, but power among the Huns was a shifting dune, not a carved throne. His early years were a relentless education in the steppe's harsh curriculum. He learned to ride before he could walk steadily, to draw a bow almost as tall as himself, to track prey across featureless plains, and to endure cold, hunger, and pain without complaint. He absorbed the tales of his ancestors, their conquests, their migrations westward from the mysterious lands beyond the Volga, pushing the Goths before them like chaff before a storm, triggering the great migrations that had shaken Rome decades before his birth. He saw the reverence, tinged with fear, accorded to his uncle, King Rugila, or Rua, the current architect of Hunnic power. Rugila had transformed the confederation from disparate raiders into a formidable military machine, extracting vast annual tributes and gold from Constantinople, a testament to Roman fear bought with imperial coin. But Attila's childhood was also marked by shadows. The steppe demanded strength, and weakness, perceived or real, was mercilessly culled. Intrigue swirled constantly within the royal clan. Around 410 AD, a pivotal event shaped the boy destined for infamy. Attila's father, Munsak, died, likely a victim of the treacherous currents of Hunnic politics. Fearing for their lives or perhaps as part of a complex power play orchestrated by Rugila, Attila and his older brother, Bleda, were sent away, not into exile, but into the gilded cage of the Roman Empire. For years, Attila lived as a hostage prince in the court of Honorius in Ravenna, or possibly Constantinople under the watchful eyes of Eastern Emperor Theodosius II. It was a world of staggering, bewildering contrast. He witnessed marble palaces that mocked the sky, armies marching in rigid formations unlike the fluid Hunnic hordes, the suffocating weight of bureaucracy, and the decadent splendor of a civilization teetering on the edge. He learned Latin and Greek, studied Roman law and military tactics, observed the labyrinthine corridors of imperial politics. He saw the empire's strength, its wealth, its engineering marvels, its disciplined legions. But with the piercing gaze of an outsider, he also saw its profound weaknesses, the crippling corruption, the deep social fissures, the arrogance born of faded glory, and the paralyzing fear his own people inspired. This sojourn wasn't merely captivity, it was an intense, immersive study of the enemy. It planted seeds of ambition, resentment, and a chilling understanding that the mighty Roman Empire could be bled, exploited, and perhaps broken. He returned to the steppe not just a Hun prince, but a unique fusion of steppe ferocity and Roman-educated cunning, carrying within him the blueprints for conquest and a deep-seated contempt for the civilization that had held him. The wind that welcomed him back now carried the scent of destiny, sharp and metallic, like blood on the breeze. Chapter 2. The Pact of Brothers, Rise of the Wolf and the Viper, 434 to 440 AD. The vast encampment sprawled like a living organism across the steppe, thousands of felt yurts dotting the landscape, herds of horses grazing under the watchful eyes of Hun youths, the air thick with the smells of smoke, dung, leather, and simmering meat. Attila and Bleda returned not as boys, but as hardened young men, their Roman polish overlaying the primal steel of their heritage. Their uncle, Rugila, the great consolidator, was dead, killed on campaign, or perhaps succumbing to the steppe's harsh justice. The mantle of leadership fell upon the brothers. But the Hunnic Confederation was not an empire to be inherited smoothly. It was a prize to be seized and held through strength, guile, and the loyalty of fierce subkings. The brothers stood before the assembled chieftains, a study in contrasts. Bleda, older, perhaps more traditionally charismatic, his face open, his bearing confident. Attila, slightly younger, possessed an unnerving stillness. His dark eyes, deep-set and intensely focused, missed nothing. He spoke less, but when he did, his words were precise, cutting. He moved with the coiled energy of a predator, radiating an aura of contained violence and unsettling intelligence. The chieftains sensed it. Bleda might command their cheers, but Attila commanded their unease, and unease, on the steppe, was a form of respect bordering on fear. Power had to be shared, a necessity dictated by tradition and the precarious balance of forces. They became co-rulers, the dual kings of the Huns. Their first act was a masterstroke of calculated diplomacy mixed with ruthless intimidation. Ambassadors from Constantinople arrived, hopeful that the transition might offer respite from Rugila's heavy tribute demands. They found no weakness. Attila and Bleda received them not in a palace, but mounted on horseback, surrounded by their grim-faced warriors. The terms they dictated were staggering, a declaration of dominance disguised as negotiation. The annual tribute was not just maintained, it was doubled. From 350 pounds of Roman gold, it soared to 700 pounds. Fugitives sheltering within the empire, Huns who had fled the harsh rule of the Khans or escaped slavery, were to be surrendered immediately. Roman markets along the Danube frontier, vital for trade and supplies, were to be reopened, but under Hunnic supervision and taxation. Failure to comply meant war. The Eastern Emperor, Theodosius II, paralyzed by internal strife and a misplaced hope that the brothers might be less formidable than their uncle, capitulated. The gold flowed north. The message echoed across the steppes and reverberated through the marble halls of Constantinople. A new era had dawned. Attila and Bleda had asserted their power externally with brutal efficiency. But the pact between the brothers was a fragile thing, a blade balanced precariously on its edge. Bleda seemed content with the immense wealth and prestige, enjoying the spoils of kingship. Attila, however, watched the horizon, his ambition a smoldering fire. He saw the tribute not as an end, but as a means. The gold bought loyalty from subjugated tribes, financed his growing army, and underscored Roman vulnerability. He studied the reports from his vast network of spies, Gothic unrest in the Balkans, Roman military deployments, the weakening Western Empire beset by Vandals and civil war. While Bleda hunted and feasted, Attila planned. He honed the Hunnic war machine, integrating conquered Germanic warriors, Ostrogoths, Gepids, Rugii, into his ranks, creating a terrifyingly diverse and effective force. He fostered a cult of personality, emphasizing divine favor and his own unique destiny. Whispers began, carefully cultivated. Attila was the chosen one, the Scourge of God, destined to wield the sword of Mars, unearthed by a herdsman and presented solely to him. The viper, content in the sun, did not yet sense the wolf gathering its pack for the kill. The steppe held its breath, waiting for the inevitable clash of the brothers. Chapter 3. The Viper's Fall, Attila Ascendant, 440 to 445 AD. The Danube, the ancient frontier, was more than a river. It was a bleeding wound. For years, tension simmered. Roman promises regarding fugitives proved hollow. The markets were points of friction, and the sheer weight of the tribute fueled resentment in Constantinople. The inevitable spark came, as Attila likely intended. He claimed a bishop had violated sacred Hunnic graves on the Roman side of the Danube, a profound sacrilege demanding retribution. Whether true or a masterful pretext, it served its purpose. In 440 AD, the Hunnic storm broke. Attila and Bleda unleashed their horde across the river. The eastern Roman frontier defenses, neglected during years of bought peace, crumbled like rotten wood. City after city fell, not just sacked, but erased. Viminatium, Singidunum, modern Belgrade, Sirmium, Nisus, names that had echoed with Roman civilization for centuries, became synonyms for utter destruction. Nisus, birthplace of Constantine the Great, was reportedly so devastated that years later, visitors had to navigate through the bones of the slain just to cross the river. The Huns employed their terrifying siege techniques, mobile towers, battering rams, and relentless barrages of arrows that darkened the sky. They showed no mercy. Prisoners were crucified en masse, impaled, or driven before the army as human shields. The Balkans ran red. Panic seized Constantinople. Theodosius II scrambled to recall troops from other frontiers, stripping the East bare. He sent desperate embassies, laden with even more gold, pleading for peace. Attila and Bleda, their appetite whetted but perhaps mindful of overextending or internal dynamics, agreed to a temporary truce in 442 AD. The price was even higher tribute and humiliating concessions. But the pause was brief. The underlying causes remained, and Attila's ambition was unsated. It was during this tense lull, around 445 AD, that the fragile pact between the brothers shattered. The details are shrouded in the smoke of history and Hunnic secrecy. Roman sources, ever eager to paint Attila as the ultimate villain, suggest outright fratricide. Did Attila lure Bleda into a trap during a hunting expedition? Did he orchestrate an accident? Or was there a more direct confrontation, a swift, brutal coup within the royal camp? The outcome was unambiguous. Bleda vanished from history. Attila stood alone. He addressed the assembled chieftains and warriors. Some accounts claim he accused Bleda of plotting against him. Others imply he simply declared his brother's reign ended by divine will or martial necessity. There was no significant uprising. Attila's power, his network of loyal warlords, like the fierce Onagesius and the cunning Ediko, and the aura of terrifying inevitability he cultivated, crushed any potential dissent before it could coalesce. Bleda's followers were absorbed or eliminated. The dual kingship was dead. Attila was now the sole ruler, the undisputed king of the Huns. The viper had fallen. The wolf reigned supreme. The steppe trembled, not just beneath the hooves of his horses, but at the force of his singular, terrifying will. He turned his gaze south and west. The Roman Empire, already bleeding from his first assault, now faced a unified and utterly ruthless adversary. The Scourge of God had truly arrived. Chapter 4. The Scourge unleashed, terror on the Danube, 447 to 450 AD. The death of Bleda wasn't merely a dynastic shift. It was the unleashing of a force of nature. Unshackled by compromise or shared authority, Attila consolidated his power with chilling efficiency. His court at his great encampment on the Hungarian plain became the nerve center of a predatory empire. Ambassadors from subject tribes and terrified Roman provinces jostled for his attention, paying homage under the watchful eyes of grim Hunnic guards. Attila himself remained an austere figure amidst the plundered riches. Priscus of Panium, a Roman diplomat who visited him, noted his simple dress, wooden plate, and cup, contrasting sharply with the gold and finery adorning his chief lieutenants. It was a calculated display, the ruler above mere material wealth, his power intrinsic and terrifying. The Eastern Empire, under the weak and vacillating Theodosius II, provided the perfect target. The pretexts were readily manufactured: unpaid tribute, harbored fugitives, perceived slights. In 447 AD, Attila launched a campaign of unprecedented scale and ferocity. The Hunnic horde, swollen with Gothic, Gepid, and other Germanic contingents, surged across the Danube like a tidal wave of iron and flesh. The Balkans became a charnel house. Marcianopolis, Philippopolis, Arcadiopolis, major cities fell one after another. The devastation was apocalyptic. Priscus, traveling through the aftermath, described a landscape of utter ruin. Fields choked with bones, cities reduced to smoldering rubble inhabited only by carrion birds, survivors huddled in shattered fortresses, skeletal and despairing. Attila's strategy was relentless terror. Sieges were brutal and efficient. Populations were massacred or enslaved en masse. He deliberately cultivated his image as the Scourge of God, Flagellum Dei, a divinely ordained punishment for a sinful world. The psychological impact was as devastating as the military onslaught. Panic spread far ahead of his armies. Refugees flooded Constantinople, overwhelming its resources and spreading tales of unspeakable horror. The Great Walls of Constantinople, the empire's last bastion, were severely damaged by a massive earthquake just as Attila approached. It seemed like an omen of divine wrath. The city braced for the final assault. But Attila, the master strategist, paused before the impregnable walls. Storming Constantinople was a prospect of staggering cost and dubious gain. He understood the power of fear and extortion better than anyone. Instead of a futile siege, he turned the screw. His armies ravaged the undefended hinterlands of Thrace with methodical cruelty, demonstrating his power to strangle the capital at will. The message was clear: pay or perish utterly. Theodosius II, paralyzed by terror, dispatched the senator Anatolius with terms. The negotiations were conducted under the shadow of the Hunnic army. The price Attila demanded was extortionate: immediate payment of 6,000 pounds of gold, a staggering sum, equivalent to decades of pre-war tribute. Annual tribute tripled to 2,100 pounds. Evacuation of a vast strategic strip of territory south of the Danube, and the surrender of all Hun fugitives without question. Constantinople, on the brink of collapse, agreed to everything. Attila withdrew, laden with gold and glory, leaving the Eastern Empire economically crippled, militarily shattered, and psychologically broken. He had pushed it to the very edge of annihilation without needing to storm its heart. The West, watching in horror, knew it was next. Attila stood at the zenith of his power, the undisputed master of Central and Eastern Europe, his gaze now fixed firmly on the fading splendor of Rome itself. Chapter 5. A Sister's Plea. The Sword of Mars points west, 450 to 451 AD. The immense treasure wagons groaned under their load of Roman gold as they lumbered north towards Attila's stronghold on the Hungarian plains. Yet, for the king of the Huns, the glittering hoard represented not an end, but fuel for a greater fire. The east was blood-dry, compliant, a trembling tributary. His gaze, restless and ambitious, turned inevitably towards the sunset, towards the fragmented, weakened, but still legendary Western Roman Empire. The West, however, presented a different challenge. It was a fractured landscape. Emperor Valentinian III, weak and dominated by his formidable mother, Galla Placidia, ruled from Ravenna. The real military power lay with Flavius Aetius, the last of the Romans, a brilliant general who had spent his youth as a hostage among the Huns and knew Attila well. Gaul was a patchwork of Roman control, semi-independent barbarian kingdoms, Visigoths, Burgundians, Franks, and regions slipping into anarchy. Italy remained the symbolic heart, but vulnerable. Attila needed a casus belli, a cloak of legitimacy for his Western ambitions. It arrived, wrapped in imperial intrigue, in the form of a woman's plea. Honoria, the spirited and rebellious sister of Emperor Valentinian III, found herself imprisoned in Constantinople after a scandalous affair. Desperate, she committed an act of breathtaking audacity. She smuggled a message and her personal ring to Attila, imploring him to rescue her and, implicitly, offering herself in marriage. To Honoria, it was likely a desperate gambit for freedom. To Attila, it was a gift from the gods. He declared Honoria's ring a betrothal token and demanded half the Western Empire as her rightful dowry. It was a transparent pretext, laughable in its scale, but it served its purpose. It gave him a claim, however flimsy, to invade as a champion rather than merely a conqueror. The West reacted with a mixture of terror and incredulity. Valentinian III furiously denounced his sister and rejected Attila's demands. Aetius, the pragmatist, understood the existential threat. He embarked on a desperate diplomatic blitz, leveraging his old connections and playing on the fears of the barbarian kingdoms settled within Gaul. He met with Theodoric I, the aged but formidable king of the Visigoths entrenched in Toulouse. He parleyed with the Burgundians, still licking wounds from an earlier Hunnic attack, and the Franks, whose rival factions could be swayed. Aetius painted a stark picture. Attila was not just Rome's enemy, but a devourer of worlds. If Gaul fell, their kingdoms would be next. Survival demanded unity against the common scourge. Attila mobilized his vast confederation. In the spring of 451 AD, the earth trembled. The Hunnic horde, estimated by terrified chroniclers in the hundreds of thousands, though likely 70,000 to 100,000 fighting men, crossed the Rhine near Moguntiacum, Mainz. It was a multi-ethnic juggernaut. Hunnic horse archers forming the lethal core, flanked by Ostrogoths under Valamir, Gepids led by Ardaric, Rugians, Syrians, Thuringians, and others. A testament to Attila's ability to bind diverse peoples through fear, ambition, and the promise of plunder. The invasion was a whirlwind of destruction. Metz was stormed and burned. Trier, an imperial capital, suffered a similar fate. Cities fell like wheat before the scythe. Refugees choked the roads, carrying tales of horror ahead of the advancing tide. Attila's goal seemed clear: to sweep through Gaul, shatter the fragile Romano-Barbarian alliances, and then descend upon Italy itself. He marched relentlessly towards Aurelianum, Orleans, a key strategic city on the Loire. Its fall would open the path south. The fate of the West hung in the balance as the two most formidable forces of the age, the Hunnic Confederation and the desperate alliance forged by Aetius, converged on the rolling plains of Gaul. The stage was set for one of history's most pivotal clashes. Chapter 6. The Field of Nations. Clash at the Catalonian Plains, June 451 AD. The air over northeastern Gaul hung thick with dust and dread. Attila's horde, a vast, rumbling shadow, swept past the smoldering ruins of Divodurum, Metz, and Augustobona, Troyes, driving terrified populations before it like leaves before a gale. His target was Aurelianum, Orleans, a vital fortress city commanding a crossing of the Loire River. Its bishop, Aenianus, frantically prayed for deliverance while overseeing last-minute defenses, knowing its fall would open the heart of Gaul. But salvation, of a sort, was approaching. Aetius, the architect of the West's defense, had performed near miracles. He'd forged an unlikely coalition. His own threadbare Roman legions, stiffened by Gallic auxiliaries, the Visigoths under their aging, fierce King Theodoric I, who had reluctantly heeded the call, bringing his heavily armored cavalry and infantry, Burgundians burning for revenge, Franks, both Salian and Ripuarian factions, setting aside rivalry, Alans under their king Sangiban, Saxons, and even former Roman soldiers turned warlords. It was a fragile alliance, held together by shared terror of Attila and Aetius' diplomatic genius. They marched with grim purpose, racing to intercept the Huns before Orleans fell. As Attila's vanguard reached the outskirts of Orleans, the desperate prayers seemed answered. Scouts reported Aetius and Theodoric approaching rapidly from the south. Attila, a master of maneuver, knew a siege under such circumstances was suicidal. He broke off the attack, withdrawing strategically northeast, seeking open ground favorable to his cavalry. The allies gave chase. They met on a vast, rolling plain near Duro Catalanum, modern Chalons in Champagne, a place that would become known as the Catalonian Plains or simply the Mauriac Plain. On the morning of June 20th, for 51 AD, the exact date is debated, but June is widely accepted. Two colossal armies faced each other under a brooding summer sky. Attila positioned himself and his elite Hunnic warriors in the center, the deadly core of his force. To his left, he placed his Ostrogothic allies under Valamir. To his right, the Gepids, Rugians, and others led by Ardaric. He anchored his line on a low ridge, occupying the high ground. Across the field, Aetius and Theodoric deployed their coalition. Aetius, wary of the Visigothic contingent's potential unreliability or ambition, placed his Romans and Alans, whose loyalty was also questionable, on the left flank. The Visigoths, under Theodoric and his son Thorismund, held the crucial right flank. The Franks and other auxiliaries filled the center. It was a calculated risk, pitting the coalition's strongest elements against Attila's wings. Attila, ever the showman and seeking divine favor, delayed the battle. He consulted his shamans, who examined entrails and declared omens unfavorable but prophesied the death of a great enemy leader. Seizing on this, Attila roused his men. "I will hurl the first spear. Who dares to stand idle once Attila fights is already dead." The chilling war cry of the Huns rose like a howl from the steppes. The battle commenced with a thunderous Hunnic cavalry charge aimed at the coalition center. What followed was not a single clash, but a swirling, chaotic melee that raged for hours, perhaps all day. The Hunnic horse archers unleashed clouds of arrows, seeking gaps. The Visigothic and Roman heavy infantry locked shields, forming walls of iron. Cavalry charges collided with earth-shattering force. The ridge became a charnel house. Theodoric, leading a Visigothic charge, was reportedly thrown from his horse and trampled to death in the press. fulfilling the shaman's prophecy, though not the one Attila hoped for. His death, instead of breaking the Visigoths, ignited a furious rage. Thorismund, learning of his father's fall, rallied his men with desperate fury. As dusk approached, the battle reached a horrific stalemate. The center, where the Franks and Alans fought, was a slaughterhouse. The Roman left held against the Ostrogoths. On the crucial right, Thorismund's enraged Visigoths, perhaps supported by Aetius' maneuvering reserves, began to push back Attila's Gepid flank, threatening to envelop the Hunnic center. Attila, recognizing the peril, was forced to disengage. Fighting a fierce rearguard action, he withdrew his forces towards his fortified wagon laager on the ridge. The coalition, bloodied and exhausted, didn't press a costly night attack. The Catalonian plains was not a clear-cut victory. Both sides suffered appalling losses. Theodoric was dead. Attila's aura of invincibility was cracked, but his army remained a potent force. He retreated under cover of darkness, leaving the field littered with the dead, Visigoths, Romans, Franks, Huns, Gepids, Ostrogoths, a grim testament to the clash of civilizations. Aetius, ever the pragmatist, allowed Attila to withdraw. He knew destroying the Huns completely might leave the Visigoths too powerful. Gaul was saved, for now, but the Scourge was wounded, not broken. Attila, humiliated but unbowed, retreated across the Rhine, his gaze now burning with a new, vengeful focus, the heart of the Roman West, Italy itself. Chapter 7. Fury in Italia, the sack of the north for 52 AD. The acrid taste of retreat from Gaul was ashes in Attila's mouth. The Catalonian plains had blunted his advance, shattered the myth of his invincibility on the open field, but it had not broken his spirit or his army. The immense resources plundered from the east and extorted from the west still filled his coffers. His confederation, though strained, held. The sting of setback only fueled a more ferocious resolve. If Gaul had proven a tough nut, perhaps Italy, the symbolic heart of the Roman West, would be softer. And there was the matter of Honoria. The pretext, however flimsy, still beckoned. In the spring of 452 AD, barely a year after Catalonian, the Hunnic storm turned south. This time, Attila chose a different path. Instead of the Alpine passes guarded by Aetius' forces, he struck through the Julian Alps, emerging like a specter into the fertile plains of Venetia. The invasion was a masterstroke of speed and surprise. Northern Italy, long shielded by its geography and the focus on Gaul, was utterly unprepared. Panic spread faster than the Hunnic horsemen. Aquileia, a mighty fortress city guarding the head of the Adriatic and a key strategic hub, became the first major obstacle. Aquileia was formidable, its walls high and thick, its citizens defiant. The siege began, and for weeks it seemed the city might hold. Attila's forces battered the walls, but the defenders repulsed assault after assault. Frustration mounted among the Huns. Legends arose. Attila, contemplating withdrawal, observed storks carrying their young away from the city, a sign, his shamans declared, that the city's spirit was broken. Emboldened, the Huns redoubled their efforts. They employed their full repertoire of siegecraft, battering rams, mobile towers, relentless arrow storms. Finally, a section of wall crumbled. The Huns poured in. What followed was a catastrophe etched in blood and fire. Aquileia was not merely sacked, it was annihilated. Its people were slaughtered indiscriminately, enslaved, or driven into the marshes to die. Buildings were razed, temples desecrated, the accumulated wealth of centuries plundered. The destruction was so complete that later travelers reportedly struggled to identify where the great city once stood. The message was clear: resistance meant oblivion. The fall of Aquileia shattered the will of northern Italy. City after city opened its gates or fell after token resistance, hoping to avoid Aquileia's fate. Patavium, Padua, Vaestia, Vicenza, Verona, Brixia, Brescia, Bergamo, Mediolanum, Milan, the jewels of Roman Italy were systematically plundered and occupied. Attila made Milan his temporary headquarters, holding court in the imperial palace. Stories abound of his chilling theatrics, pointing to a painting of Roman emperors enthroned with Scythian princes prostrate before them. He supposedly had a painter depict the Huns on the thrones and the emperors pouring gold at their feet. The psychological humiliation was as potent as the physical destruction. Terror, like a plague, swept southwards. Refugees flooded into the marshes, founding what would become Venice. Others fled towards Rome itself. In Ravenna, Emperor Valentinian III cowered, paralyzed by fear, while his mother Galla Placidia desperately sought divine intervention. Aetius, his forces depleted after Gaul and unable to muster a significant army quickly, shadowed the Huns but could not offer pitched battle. Rome itself seemed defenseless. The Eternal City, the heart of the ancient world, lay within Attila's grasp. The unthinkable, the sack of Rome by barbarians, loomed larger than ever before. Yet, as Attila paused near the river Pua, having devastated the north, a different kind of delegation approached his camp, one bearing not gold, but the formidable weight of spiritual authority. The fate of Rome hung not on legions, but on a meeting between the King of Terror and the Bishop of Rome. Chapter 8. The Ghost at the Gates, Leo and the Shadow of Rome, 452 AD. The late summer sun beat down on the flat, marshy landscape near Mantua, where the Mincio River flows into the Attila's vast encampment sprawled along the riverbanks, a chaotic city of tents, wagons, and picketed horses, buzzing with the clamor of a victorious army enjoying its spoils. The air reeked of smoke, sweat, horseflesh, and the unsettling tang of looted treasures piled haphazardly. Attila himself held court in a commandeered Roman villa, surrounded by his grim chieftains, Onagesius, Edico, Orestes, and the terrified envoys from plundered cities still begging for mercy. His armies controlled the richest lands of northern Italy. The road south to Rome lay open, seemingly undefended. The ultimate prize glittered on the horizon. Yet, within Attila, a complex calculus was at work. His army, though victorious, was not invincible. The hard-fought campaign in Gaul the previous year had taken a toll. The Italian campaign, while devastating, had involved grueling sieges, like Aquileia, and constant movement. His multi-ethnic horde was weary. Disease, ever present in crowded camps during summer, was likely spreading. Supplies, though ample from plunder, needed constant replenishment. More importantly, news reached him from the east. Emperor Marcian, Theodosius II's successor, a far more resolute figure, had ceased paying tribute and was rumored to be preparing an army. Leaving Italy vulnerable to a strike from Constantinople while deep in the peninsula was a dangerous gamble. It was at this moment of strategic hesitation that a remarkable embassy arrived. Leading it was not a trembling senator bearing gold, but a figure clad in simple ecclesiastical robes, Pope Leo I, Bishop of Rome. Accompanying him were Trigetius, a distinguished former consul, and possibly Avienus, another high-ranking official. They came unarmed, bearing no visible treasure, only the authority of their office and their faith. The contrast within Attila's camp was stark, the austere dignity of the Christian prelates amidst the barbaric splendor of the Hun at court. The meeting was shrouded in legend almost immediately. What transpired behind closed doors? Did Leo, with his commanding presence and spiritual authority, threaten Attila with divine wrath, invoking the fates of other conquerors who had dared sack Rome? Did he appeal to Attila's superstitious nature, perhaps reminding him of the fate of Alaric, who died shortly after sacking Rome in 410? Or did he employ pragmatic diplomacy, emphasizing the logistical nightmare of besieging Rome, the threat from Marcian in the east, and offering a dignified exit with prestige and tact? Most likely, it was a potent combination. Leo certainly offered no vast sums of gold. The Western treasury was empty. He offered something else, a face-saving retreat. He likely appealed to Attila's self-image, perhaps suggesting that sparing Rome would elevate him above mere destroyers like Alaric, marking him as a conqueror capable of magnanimity as well as terror. He may have subtly hinted at the growing power of Marcian and the vulnerability of Attila's rear. Attila, the supreme pragmatist beneath the terrifying exterior, listened. The arguments aligned with his own strategic assessment. The Pope's intervention provided the perfect pretext for a withdrawal that military prudence already dictated. He announced his decision to his surprised chieftains. He would spare Rome. The reasons he gave were deliberately ambiguous, feeding the legend. Some accounts claim he saw the spectral figures of Saints Peter and Paul threatening him behind Leo. Others state he simply cited practical concerns. The effect was the same. The Hunnic horde turned north. The relief in Italy was profound, bordering on the miraculous. Pope Leo was hailed as the savior of Rome. But Attila's withdrawal was not a retreat in disgrace. He left northern Italy utterly devastated, its economy shattered, its population decimated or dispersed. He extracted promises of tribute, though likely less than his initial demands. He departed not as a defeated king, but as one who had chosen to show mercy, his power undiminished, his gaze now shifting back towards the east, where a new emperor dared to defy him. The ghost of Alaric had been appeased, but the Scourge of God was far from finished. He returned to the Hungarian plains, not to rest, but to plot his next move against the insolent Martian. Rome had been spared, but the shadow of the Huns still darkened the world. Chapter 9. The Night of the Bride, the End of the Scourge, 453 AD. The great encampment on the Hungarian plains pulsed with a different energy. It was late spring, 453 AD. Attila had returned from Italy not with the keys to Rome, but with immense plunder and an undiminished aura of power. The defiance of Marcian and Constantinople gnawed at him, a challenge that demanded response. Plans were surely being laid, envoys dispatched, warriors mustered for a renewed assault on the east to crush the upstart emperor and replenish the Hunnic coffers. But fate, or perhaps the toll of a life lived at relentless intensity, intervened in a manner as sudden and brutal as Attila's own campaigns. Attila took yet another wife. His harem was vast, filled with women from conquered peoples and allied tribes, political alliances sealed in the bedchamber. This new bride was named Ildiko or Hildiko, reputedly a young and beautiful Germanic princess, perhaps from the Burgundians or Goths. Her marriage was likely another political maneuver, binding a potentially restless tribe closer to the Hunnic core. The wedding feast was a spectacle worthy of the king of the Huns, a riot of noise, gluttony, and heavy drinking that lasted deep into the night. Attila, known for his personal austerity but also for indulging in excess during celebrations, reveled with his chieftains, consuming vast quantities of wine. As the feasting finally subsided, Attila, heavily intoxicated, retired to his nuptial chamber with Ildiko. His guards, accustomed to his ways and respecting the privacy of the king on such a night, kept their distance. Morning came, and silence lingered unusually long from the king's quarters. Concern turned to alarm. Finally, attendants dared to enter. The scene they beheld was one of shocking stillness. Attila lay dead on his bed, amidst the rich hangings. There were no visible wounds, no signs of struggle. Ildiko sat nearby, veiled and trembling with terror. A trail of blood, not profuse but ominous, led from Attila's nose and mouth, staining his face and the bedclothes. Panic and disbelief swept the camp. The invincible Scourge of God, felled not in battle by a worthy foe, but in his own bed, theories erupted like wildfire. The official account, swiftly propagated by Attila's inner circle, likely led by his chief lieutenant, Onagesius, and his secretary, Orestes, was that Attila had suffered a massive hemorrhage, likely a ruptured esophageal varices, a common consequence of chronic heavy drinking combined with the physical stresses of his life. The nosebleed, common enough after excessive alcohol, had been fatal in his stupor. Ildiko, they claimed, was innocent, merely a terrified witness. But suspicion clung to the air like smoke. Had it been murder? Poison administered by the trembling Ildiko, acting as an agent for her people or perhaps for Roman interests. An assassination orchestrated by rivals within his own court, like the ambitious Ardaric of the Gepids, who might have seen an opportunity. Or was it truly a mundane, ignoble end for a figure of such mythic terror, the ultimate vulnerability of the flesh? The Hunnic leadership, desperate to prevent chaos and maintain their own power, suppressed any investigation that might point to foul play. They needed a swift, uncontested transition, or the fragile confederation would explode. Attila's funeral was an event of immense, barbaric solemnity. His body was placed within 3 coffins, one of gold, one of silver, one of iron, symbols of his plunder, his power, and his indomitable will. He was buried secretly, under cover of night, in a location known only to a select few. Legend claims that the slaves who dug the grave and buried him were then slaughtered to keep the secret eternal. The Huns cut their hair and gashed their faces in a ritual of profound mourning, letting their blood mingle with their tears for the king who had led them to the pinnacle of power and terror. The earth closed over Attila, but the tremors of his passing were only just beginning. The scourge was gone, and the empire he had forged through sheer force of will now faced its greatest test, survival without him. Chapter 10. Empire of Dust, the Unraveling of a Legend, 454 AD and beyond. The death of Attila was not merely the passing of a king. It was the removal of the keystone holding together a vast, unstable arch. The immense Hunnic confederation, bound by fear, ambition, and the magnetic, terrifying personality of one man, began to crumble almost immediately. The air over the Hungarian plains, once thick with the certainty of conquest, now crackled with tension and the scent of betrayal. Attila's designated heirs were his eldest sons, Elik, Dingizic, and Ernak. But they were young, inexperienced, and lacked their father's preternatural ability to command the fierce loyalty and fear of diverse warlords. The powerful subkings who had bowed to Attila saw opportunity. Foremost among them was Ardaric, king of the Gepids, a loyal lieutenant for years, but one whose ambitions had likely been carefully concealed. He saw the chance for his people, long subservient, to break free and claim their own kingdom. Disputes over the succession and the division of Attila's immense treasure ignited the tinderbox. Ardaric, supported by other Germanic chieftains chafing under Hunnic dominance, notably the Ostrogoths under Valimir, raised the standard of rebellion. Elik, attempting to assert his authority as his father's principal heir, gathered the loyalist Huns and their remaining allies. The two forces met in 454 AD at the Battle of Nideo, fought somewhere along the river of the same name, likely in Pannonia. Nideo was a cataclysm for the Hunnic Empire. It was a brutal, chaotic struggle, not between Huns and Romans, but between the former components of Attila's horde. The Germanic tribes, fighting with the desperation of men seeking freedom, shattered the Hunnic core. Elik was killed on the battlefield. The defeat was total and decisive. The spell was broken. The Hunnic Empire disintegrated with astonishing speed. Like ice breaking apart on a spring river, the subject peoples surged into independence. The Gepids, under Ardaric, established a powerful kingdom in Dacia. The Ostrogoths, under Valimir and later Theodomir, father of Theodoric the Great, carved out territories in Pannonia, setting the stage for their future invasion of Italy. The Rugii, Heruli, Syrii, and others claimed lands along the Danube frontier. Attila's surviving sons, Dingizic and Ernak, led shattered remnants of the Hunnic people. Dingizic tried desperately to maintain a rump state and even threaten the Eastern Empire, but he was defeated and killed in 469 AD, his head displayed in Constantinople. Ernak led his group further east, fading into obscurity among the peoples of the Pontic steppe. Within a generation, the terror that had held Europe in its grip was gone. The Huns, as a dominant political and military force, vanished from history almost as swiftly as they had appeared. The vacuum they left behind reshaped the map of Europe. The Germanic kingdoms, now free and powerful, became the new players. Ostrogoths in Italy, Visigoths in Spain and Aquitaine, Vandals in North Africa, Franks rising in Gaul, Angles and Saxons crossing to Britain. The Western Roman Empire, already moribund, finally collapsed in 476 AD when the Germanic chieftain Odoacer deposed the last emperor, Romulus Augustulus. The East, though battered, endured as the Byzantine Empire, a flickering torch of Roman tradition. Attila himself, however, never truly died. He became a legend, a figure of mythic proportions. To the Romans and medieval Christians, he was the epitome of barbaric cruelty, the Scourge of God sent to punish a sinful world, his name synonymous with mindless destruction. In Germanic sagas, like the Nibelungenlied, where he appears as Etzel, he became a powerful, wealthy, and sometimes even noble king, a backdrop for heroic and tragic tales. In Hungarian national mythology, crafted centuries later, he was reimagined as a glorious ancestor king, a symbol of martial prowess and ancient greatness. Despite the historical Huns having only a fleeting connection to the Magyars who settled Hungary much later, the truth, as always, lay somewhere in the churned earth of the Catalonian plains in the silent grave by the Nideo. Attila was a product of the unforgiving steppe, a military genius of his time, a master of psychological terror and pragmatic politics. He rose from obscurity to forge an empire that stretched from the Caspian to the Rhine, shaking the foundations of the ancient world. He understood the weaknesses of Rome and exploited them ruthlessly. His charisma held together a fractious coalition through sheer force of will, and his death revealed that coalition's fatal fragility. He was neither a demon nor a saint, but a man of his brutal era who left an indelible, terrifying mark on history. The wind still whispers across the Hungarian plains, carrying the echoes of thundering hooves and the chilling war cry of a people long gone, a reminder of the shadow that once darkened the world, the shadow of Attila, the king of the Huns. His empire turned to dust, but the legend of the Scourge endures. If you enjoyed this story, subscribe, drop a like, and tell us in the comments. Which warrior of history should we cover next?